You're good.
Hello, hello. Welcome to a peek inside the SEC. Allie Peak, TJ Pittinger coming to you on a Monday morning at 10 a.m. No children are in my house at this morning. TJ, I actually sent them with Eric to get Starbucks because we were also have coffee creamer this morning. So it was a rough go. Are yours at school?
They are, yeah. So no, Mondays are actually my free day because my little guy goes to my mother-in-law's, so they're actually all gone. So Mondays are a great day to get a lot of stuff done or just goof off, whatever. But yeah, none here today, which
I need a
is a
scenario
bonus.
like that. I don't have
You have like 4,000 family members that live in Tampa.
I
Like
know,
just
but they
take them to
all
their
had children too. So like they're
take
really
them to your mom and dad. Like just this is you. We're gonna have a grandma and grandpa day on Monday.
Oh, yeah. Well, my parents, I'm pretty sure, are skiing in Utah currently, so not doing any grandmother and grandfathering duties for sure. But all right, so it's the off season, but there is a lot to talk about. Okay, lots and lots going on. I am really, really interested in this new fad of canceling spring games. I think this is kind of crazy. I mean, I guess when it's explained to me, I sort of understand, but it's just another like moment where we show that college football is not at all about the fans, and that bothers me.
Yeah, before we dive into this, my hot take is that I don't know if it'll all go away by next year, but
Mhm.
it would surprise me if there are still spring games in 2027. Like, I think you'll see a lot more cancel next year, and then I think by 2027 they'll all go away. Now, I hope to be wrong about that. I would
Yeah,
love for this to get revisited, and it's like you idiot, because I think they are. There are some benefits. I think we can talk about some ways that they could reimagine them and do some things differently than what they do. But I saw we on your Gator show, we've had Brooks Austin on,
mhm.
covers UGA and then does a lot of national stuff too, the film guy. And he talked about how he thought this was more like less about tampering. Like, let's not pretend that every coach in America didn't recruit all these kids. Every coach in America hasn't
Sure.
already watched film on these
We didn't
kids,
need
or
to see the spring games to
right,
determine who
like
we were tampering with.
yeah, exactly. And he says it's more about revenue. It's more like I would love to know what the
Mm.
cost of putting on a spring game is, but he talks about how you still have to hire all the security, you still have to hire all the stadium staff, you still have to hire all the concessions, right? And you have to do all that. What is the expense to put on a spring game? Not nearly the same expense as putting on a real game.
Sure.
Except maybe in some of these places like Nebraska and Tennessee, where they sell the Ohio State, where they sell these things out, right?
Well,
But
it depends on
there's
are
still
they
the
selling tickets for it though or not too, because packing your stadium for free, even with what their
correct. Yeah.
revenue generation on food is different. Like I know Florida's season tickets. I don't know what the case is for Florida State right now, but Florida's currently it's free. It was not always that way.
So Florida State charges like $5 a ticket, and it's more so just a way to take attendance. I don't really think they care because $5 times the 30,000 people that come, you're talking about a nominal amount, like what, 150 grand, but it costs more than that to put the event on. And
Yeah.
so, not, I mean, 150 grand, certainly
Yeah,
cuts
but
into that
if
cost.
you pack it, if you're Nebraska and you have 90,000 people there, that's almost a $500,000. And then at $5 a ticket, right? That's $450,000. So that is a little bit different than the
That helps
150,000. That might defer some of the costs there.
for sure. So I, but I don't know like what is the true cost to put on a
Yeah.
spring game. That's
Yeah.
something both of us could find out pretty easily if we
Yeah.
would have asked. But um, I think if that number is 5 million to put
Mhm.
that, and
Right.
that's a crazy number. There's no way that it's that much. But if it's a couple million, if it's 1.5 million, then you kind of look at like, all right, we make 150 back on tickets, but it costs us 10 times that amount to run the event.
Right.
By the time you hire the local police department and security and stadium and
Yeah.
all that stuff, like it is a lot. All the people that work in the game behind the scenes, cleanup crews and everything else.
But
It
we've never been concerned about the cost of it before,
well,
right? And college
we've
football has never been making more money than it is currently at this
I,
moment.
Brooks talks about that specifically. The reason why is because of the revenue share. Like we've never had a $20 million line item that just got added to every single
Yeah.
budget in America or every budget in America of teams that want to compete for championships, right? Like I don't expect,
But why
you
is
know,
it then the coaches that are the ones that are saying they're doing it and they're doing it for tampering purposes? Why hasn't the conference as a whole come out? Or why haven't individual athletic directors? Because honestly, if your athletic director came forward and said, hey, with this new cost sharing that's going to be taking place, it's hard for us to justify the cost. So unfortunately, we're doing away with this or whatever. Like at the very least, then you take it on the athletic director. This just falls on the coach at this moment.
So my take is, and we may disagree here, shocker. My take is that would be a worse look, because what that athletic director is saying is, hey, I know that this spring game is 100% for the fans, the lifeblood of our organization that pays us and keeps the lights on. But because we have to pay more money and we're all having bloated salaries and our coach is making $10 million a year, we're going to take this away from the fans, right? So I think it's almost a better, now it's not morally better, but it's almost a better look to blame it on tampering, or Steve Sarkisian blaming it on being tired, from all the games they played. I think it's it's a worse look to lie. And I'm not saying Matt Rule or Lincoln Riley or Steve Sarkisian are lying. Florida State's is canceled too, but that's more of the renovation stuff that's going on in Doak. I think it's almost a better look to blame it on something else than for the AD to come out and say like, hey, this thing that is purely for you, you're starved for football because you haven't had it for 4 months. It's a nice break between the 8 months you don't have football. We're going to take that away instead of paying our coaches less money, instead of me taking less money, instead of us. I think that would go over like a lead balloon,
I personally, I think both should go over like a lead balloon.
Sure, I agree. I just think it's worse to tell the fans.
So many benefits to a spring game from the fan perspective, but also from the player perspective. And I look at, you're going to see a lot of guys in spring games that you aren't going to see in the fall, but they've put in the same amount of work the entire year as those guys you do see in the fall. And I do feel like sometimes the spring game is a little bit of a reward for them, right? Your time earned in the spring game many times is based solely on effort, not necessarily on performance. And coaches set it up that way on purpose. And, I'll give an example, not to throw my husband under the bus, but, Eric started every game at Florida for 4 years. Eric also, shockingly enough, was kind of an arrogant asshole, right? So hasn't changed. That's still, and I'm married to him, so I must find this attractive in some capacity here.
Well,
but
opposites attract. Just kidding.
Every spring, whoever it was, whether it was Zook or whether it was Meyer, would name the backup as the starter every spring without fail, and it was always just like a little keep you on the edge of your seat, right? And so when Eric would punt for one team, the other guy would punt for the other. And honestly, in hindsight, it was very mean to the backup, who every year thought there was a legitimate chance that he might become the starter. And coaching was doing it as a mind thing for Eric. The person that ended up being, messed with mentally would have been the backup. But that happens across the country in every position, right? You want to push the young guys or the walk-ons or the seniors that haven't really been as impactful as you'd hope they would be. You want to push them with the guys who have been performing on the field. Like there's an entire team dynamic that takes place with that. It is huge for the fans. It's a great way to break up the season. I used to love, Florida used to tie when Meyer was there. They used to tie things to the spring game. And so it would be like, okay, the team that doesn't win has to do the landscaping on campus. And so there was literally a year where the next Sunday after the spring game, the team that lost had to show up and they were planting trees all over UF's campus. And Meyer had arranged it with the, groundskeeping crew of the university to make that happen so that it would hurt, right? So that you cared about this game. And those were the games that Florida was getting 75,000 people in their spring games. And I don't know. We're watching pieces of the sport that we love be chipped away at. And I think we can say it's just a spring game, or, it's just a rivalry that maybe was your fourth best rivalry, when we did realignment. It's just this, it's just that. But when you add all those little, it's just up, college football is changing in a drastic way, a million little chinks at a time. Yeah. And I don't love that.
So here's a couple of ideas, 2 ideas that I think schools could implement to do something with the spring, right? Like to give something back to the fans, because in large purposes, I know a lot of coaches hate the spring game too, because they do all these scrimmages like outside of it anyway. And so and they're more situational. Like, I'll tell you this, Florida State has not done a traditional spring game under Norvell. First year was 2020, so we didn't have him. And then since then, he's done, there's been, 11 on 11 football, but it's been a lot of situational stuff. Guys will start from the 30. Like, it's not really a game. The score ends up like usually stupid, like 12-4, because they do different scoring and stuff, whatever. He wants to, use it more as a practice as opposed to an actual game. He wants to do situational stuff like a real practice would be, not, a performance for TV or whatever. I think you could do one of two things. I think one, you could merge kind of what Ole Miss does, which is kind of more of a pro. Now, Norvell would hate this because it's not anywhere. So this wouldn't be great for Florida State, but all college football should really do this. They should merge what Ole Miss and Florida do. And the Ole Miss side it shouldn't even count as a practice. Like the NCAA, or once they lose power and we go to the autonomous four kind of controlling things, then we'll go with that. But it shouldn't even count as a practice. Like, it shouldn't count against you. But you should do fun stuff like 7-on-7 and stuff that, do a flag football game, get some old legends out there or some guys that have retired, whatever. Like, make it kind of fun for the fans. I don't care. Do like a pie eating contest. It doesn't, whatever you want to do. That's just kind of fun, interactive. And then you should work with your
TJ.
Lose money. We talked about the revenue side of things, but
TJ,
if you could
you paused for 20 seconds. Your face froze.
I don't know.
Anything.
What was the last thing you heard?
You said the second thing they should do.
Yeah, they should tie it in with their collective. And they should, Florida does a good job of this. Florida State's done it a couple of times with the Battle's End, but they should do the player signings and the idea of Fan Appreciation Day, move that back from when it used to be everybody had it in August, right? Move it way back to the spring.
Florida's still in August, shockingly enough. They still do it.
A lot of schools have done away with it because of the NIL stuff, like just whatever, right? Like the way that you have, guys are signing autographs for free or whatever. But do that with your collective and use it as a fundraising event, right? And so you may lose money on the spring game. Say it costs $250,000 to put the spring game on, or the spring event that you do. But if you get that much committed, right, from people signing up for a monthly donation or whatever, you will make that back in the long term of your year, right? And so you'll lose money in April, but you'll make money the rest of the year. I think that would be a really good way to do it. Just kind of something that's more fun, something that's, the spring game is always typically a little bit more kid friendly than maybe a game is. And so it would be something that you could still bring your kids to. Your 5-year-old doesn't care if there's an actual scrimmage going on or if they're playing 7-on-7. Like, they just want to be in the environment and see the players and get autographs and stuff like that. So, like, I think that would be a good way to do it. Or if the cost really is the issue, you should still have you could still have the game or scrimmage or practice or whatever you're doing, and you could just televise. You could still just televise it, right? Like, the actual money that you're bringing in. And I know that's not as good as bringing fans. Like, there's something special about going to your stadium and being back up in that college town for the weekend or whatever. But you could still, at the very least, just televise these things, right? You could still say, hey, we're not going to invite fans up because of the cost, the things that are going on, but we're still going to put it on TV. And we have seen over the last 5 years, spring game attendance has waned since COVID for the very reason of, hey, I can just watch this on TV. Like, used to be able to not watch spring games on TV. And now you're like, well, I can just watch it on TV and avoid it's a little closer for you, but avoid an 8-hour round trip to go watch a scrimmage. Like, yeah, I'll just watch it on ESPN Plus or whatever. So I think you could do one of those two things. They're very different ideas. And at least say, like, hey man, we're not going to have you up to the stadium, but we are going to put it on TV. You can watch this thing. And I think either one of those would at least be some kind of a, hey, we're giving something back to you. We're going to do something for you. So they probably won't do either one of them, but those would be my ideas.
So, here's kind of an idea and also a take. So at Florida, and I don't know if this is the case everywhere, but this is my experience with Florida. Florida makes a really big deal in the spring game about bringing back their former players. So there are hundreds of former players that come. There's a huge tailgate that takes place beforehand. And I think that they would lose if that game goes away. That's the biggest event that they do for former players, and they would have to figure out a way moving that. But I do think that those are important lifebloods of the program, as well as keeping those former players happy. Florida did used to do a flag football game of former players prior to the game starting. I think that's an interesting point that you brought up. The other thing UF did years ago, when Meyer was there, is they did an event called Charity Challenge, and they did it at the end of the summer. But you could, it was in July, right before two-a-days, but you could do it for the spring game. And essentially during the spring, your team is split into mini teams, which is exactly what happens over the summer as well, right? And you are kind of competing against each other. They would keep track of points, and this happened for weeks, right, within the locker room. But these same teams would go out on charity challenge night. They do it Friday night. It was under the lights. It was very cool. They'd all have a shirt on representing whatever charity they were representing, and they would do stuff on the field skills wise, like you were kind of talking about, like Ole Miss, tire flips, shuttle race. They even would throw like a dizzy bat in there, but skills competitions, pull-ups, push-ups, hangs, like just things like that. And they would add up, and then there would be a winner. And that winner basically won for their charity, and then the entire team would do something for that charity, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, and they would then go build a house, or they would whatever. But you could tie it in like you're talking about with the collective, and maybe even the collective makes a donation to that, or the team just physically does some sort of charity work for that event. They would give each of the charities tickets, and that way they could, and it was free to get in anyway, but it was more ceremonial than anything else. Like, this section belongs to, whatever, this charity. There's something you could tie in, but I do think limiting opportunities for fans to get to know players is a negative, right? It hurts college football. It's a problem. Your fans become super fans when they feel like they know the players that they're rooting for. That's already a problem these days because of the transfer portal. But when you limit opportunities for fans to really engage with players in person, I think you hurt it even more.
Yeah. What about this? Okay, this is crazy. And people have talked about doing something like this at all times, and they would never do this in a full-on capacity because of injuries and things like that, and maybe tempers and everything else. What if schools partnered up with their rivals and did this? Like, what if Florida and Florida State did exactly what you just talked about? Yeah. And it wasn't a full-on game, right? Like we will be protective of injuries and things like that. But what if you had like a 7-on-7, Florida and Florida State? What if you had like a jump, like the DB covers a wide receiver and it's just a 1-on-1 and you've got a guy throwing a jump ball like that? Could you imagine? And if you alternated the stadiums, right? You just went back and forth every year, the stadiums would sell out. Like it wouldn't be like 30, 40,000 people there at each game. It would be whatever the capacity, right? 75, 85,000 people. So yeah, that would be. Now, again, and you could use it as a fundraiser. Hey, the loser of this is going to have to give $50,000 to whatever charity, right? And then we sell the tickets. And if you buy a Gator ticket, it goes to Florida Victorious. If you buy a Seminole ticket, it goes to the Battle's End. That would blow out of the water. Like, could you imagine getting to go watch Florida State in the spring, even though it wasn't a real game, even though the one-on-ones, our wide receiver on your DB, like.
So why don't you let them know?
Try our best, but nobody, the big problem is, and you mentioned this too, the big problem is the people that run this sport don't actually care about this sport. And so like we're trying to think of ways to give back to the fans, do things for the fans, do things we as fans would want to see. Right. The people that run the sport don't actually care. And so, yeah, we're coming up with ideas that nobody's going to do because they don't actually care about football or the fans.
Well, if y'all want people that care about football, TJ and I happen to have some free time and we would be willing to run this sport.
Yeah. Sign us up.
Of course. All right. Well, I'm glad Florida's having theirs this year. I will say, I think maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. But one of the things that Billy Napier has done the best in his tenure at UF is spring games. I think that he has made them exciting. It hasn't been situational football. It's been real games. We've gotten to the point where we've seen like chippiness on the sidelines and stuff between players because they care that much. And I am 1,000% here for that. So I'm glad at least Florida's having one this year. And I hope that you are wrong that they're going away. Okay.
But do you think I am? Do you think they're going away?
I mean, this year would tell me that we're trending in that direction. I hope that that's not the case. I hope that the fans of those schools where they go away make a big enough stink that other schools aren't willing to follow suit. But I don't know. TBD, right? We shall see.
It's a very political answer.
I know. Well, I mean, that's how I feel. I hope it's not, but it appears to be trending that direction. Something that is not going away anytime soon is the college football playoff. In fact, it will be expanding more than likely. And several theories out there about how that could possibly happen and when, right? I mean, I think that most people think that we're looking at expansion 2026, right?
Yeah, it would surprise me if it doesn't go to. I saw, a couple of ESPN reports even this morning that 14 at this point is more likely than 16, and it will probably be what happens in 2026. And so the big question that everyone asks is, how do we stay engaged with conference championships? Why do we continue to care about conference championships? Lane Kiffin came out and said, hey, why are we even going to play in this thing if we're potentially going to be eliminated? And he said, I'm not the only one that thinks this. I'm just the only one that'll say it. Rhett Lashley, SMU was. Say what?
Which is very par for the course for Lane.
For sure. Rhett Lashley, though, undefeated in the ACC, said the same thing. Like, you're telling me that I could just take a bye this weekend and be in the playoff, and if I go lose this thing, I might get voted out? Like, what's the advantage of going and playing it? And you look at the two teams that won the conference championships. They literally got the hardest two, the Big Ten and the SEC. They got the hardest two roads, right? And so I think that conferences realize that the value of their championship games for the totality of the sport. Now, I do think there's still some pride in winning your conference, right? And they haven't totally gotten rid of that yet in college football, but it seems like it's coming. That is still there, but the value toward, winning it all, like what you're doing to accomplish the ultimate goal, seems to be fading. And so conferences trying to figure out what they can do to breathe some life back into that, reverse that trend. It does seem like that's at least a positive that conferences are trying to figure out. So two big options, right? The Big Ten and the SEC considering one thing together, not together, but like kind of the same idea. And then the SEC kind of has a weird one that I don't love, but let's talk about it. The Big Ten kind of thinking of an idea where your top 6 teams qualify for what we know as conference championship weekend, where number 1 and number 2 would play each other for the conference championship. Both of those teams are in no matter what. That would just literally be still the Big Ten championship. Winner gets the number 1 seed, loser gets the number 2 seed in the Big Ten's final rankings. And then 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5, and the winners of those 2 games move on. So 1 and 2 in no matter what, winner is the Big Ten champion. If 3 beats 6, and 4 beats 5, then 3 and 4 are in. The SEC considering that option as well. I don't hate that. Like, it's fine. Again, you're protecting the regular season somewhat because 1 and 2 still play for the title, and then 3 through 6 get a chance to play their way in. The other one that the SEC is considering is 4 play-in games, 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 4 versus 5, 3 versus 6. I hate that. I think that is just incredibly stupid. I don't necessarily think that the team that finishes 8th should be in a one-off game where the number 1 team who maybe went undefeated in conference or maybe just had 1 loss is playing a team with 3 or 4 losses and has a chance to not make the playoff at that point. Like, could you imagine a scenario where Ole Miss, this year it would have been number 1 Texas against number 8 Ole Miss. Ole Miss just gets hot in one game or Texas struggles in a game. What they've done over the entire regular season is all of a sudden just thrown away, and number 8 gets to go on and number 1 eliminated. So I don't mind the first option. Nothing is perfect in my opinion. Perfect would be backing up 15 years and running with that. That's not going to happen. I don't mind the option number 1. I hate the SEC's second option. I think it's just ludicrous to do that. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
I hate both options. I hate the second option more, obviously, because I just think it's asinine. And I think you and I had a phone call about this a few days ago. I think it was you that made the statement where you were like, I think they just threw that out there so that they could say there was a second option and it made the first option more appealing. And that's very much what it feels like because it completely devalues the regular season, which in theory is what the SEC says they're trying to protect. And I just think it's wholly stupid. But I feel like we're solving a problem that doesn't actually exist. And that's bothering me. I'll get to that. But for me, the very simplest thing before we expand, before we do anything else, is to just not have these automatic automatically seeded 1 through 4. That I think eliminates a lot of problems. Let's do exactly what we did last year, but let's be honest about how we rank them 1 through 12 and seat them in that way instead of anybody getting an automatic, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 because they won their conference, because that's why we watched some of the very difficult games for like an Ohio State or for whatever. That's why the seating was messed up. So let's try it that way before we completely implode it and do something else that I think is even more dumb. So let's go back to the first theory. I just think it's solving a problem that doesn't exist. And I know that people say that conference schedules are not equitable. And we need it because you could both play in the Big Ten or both play in the SEC, and one of you play, 6 top 25 teams and one of you play one, and that's not fair. And I do understand that feeling. And I do think that conferences should do a better job, particularly if we're only going to release 2 schedules at a time, being more balanced about how we do the scheduling. It was more difficult when schedules were released, 9 years ahead of time to look at our crystal ball and determine how many top 25 teams we were giving each school, right? It's a little bit easier when we're only doing it 2 years at a time, which is currently what we're doing. But let the SEC will have their championship weekend. More than likely 1 and 2 will go in. That will be fine. We have the at-large bids to determine everything else. I think that that's how we protect the integrity of the game. I don't think it's that we need some playoff system to get into our conference championship before we go to the actual playoff system. And I think what will end up happening there is we'll end up canceling regular season games, because one of the other arguments that we talk about for maintaining playoff size and things like that is to protect players. And I think it was Crane that made this point on our show last week. And it's essentially like there is a tipping point where we say there's too many games, we're risking injury on these players. And are we doing that if we're setting this up and now 8 teams are playing conference weekend instead of 2? So I hate both, honestly. I do. I think it's far too drastic. I think it's much smarter, much more prudent to kind of make tiny tweaks to the 12 that we have and at least see if that can work before we expand. I would be a huge proponent, and you know this, if you've watched the show more than once, you at home know this as well. I'm a huge proponent of the BCS formula. Why can we not use the BCS formula to determine? We don't need 12 people sitting in a room, not even drinking beer or wings, so I trust absolutely nothing coming out of them if you've seen all of these videos from inside those rooms, to determine who goes where. Why can't there be a formula that takes into account strength of schedule, conference, win-loss, how much you won by, the BCS that already existed and almost never got it wrong back then?
So the only like argument that I would have against that, not the BCS specifically, because I'm fine with that over the committee. What it feels like it does to me is in the SEC specifically, let's use that conference. You felt like you had six teams that had a really good argument, right? So Texas and Georgia, Tennessee all got in, but then you had 3 more teams that felt like they had a really good argument. Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. Alabama, gets in if Clemson doesn't win the ACC. Ole Miss was a team that won 10 games this year, 9 in the regular season. South Carolina, probably the hottest team down the stretch, winning 6 of their last 6 games. And so I think that what it would do is it would do 2 things. And here's why I kind of buy in.
Games too, didn't they?
They lost to Texas in there. But
lost 5.
So I think it would do a couple of things. It would help. It would take away the advantage of teams that didn't have to play conference championship weekend, and it would make them play that weekend, right? So it's adding more games, but it's just leveling the playing field. Like Texas and Georgia had to play an extra game, and everybody else got to just sit back and rest up for the playoffs, right? So it would level that a little bit, and it would settle those debates, right? The debates that we had over, hey, Texas and Georgia, you're already in. But Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Ole Miss, hey, we're going to give you guys a chance to settle on the field. So to me, it's just a play-in game for the playoff, right? Number 1 and number 2 are already in. It's, okay, Alabama, you want to be in? Go out and win a game, right? Okay, LSU, you want to be in? Go out and win. Well, LSU wouldn't have been in.
I think you are giving SEC fans, college football fans in general, far too much credit if you think that we're just going to let that lie, that it settles it on the field. There's just going to be some other type of argument that's created after that. Like
it does take some of the objectivity out. Like if you know at the beginning of the season, you have to do X, Y, Z, you have to qualify in the top 6, and then you have to win 1 game, right? Or qualify in the top 2, and then you're in automatically. I don't hate that idea. I also think that just from the perspective of, like we just said, the teams that got to sit, like the Ohio State that got to sit and not play in the playoff, right? Or not play in the conference championship game and then just lay waste to everybody. They would have had to prove it on the field. And I think now they may have won that game by 1 million, right? Like they did every game in the playoffs. But I do think, I don't know. I don't hate it from that perspective because we are still in that model. we are still protecting the SEC championship. Like that is a 1 versus 2 matchup. There's no qualifier for it. And the winner of that game is the SEC champion. And then we're just making the rest of it play-in games. Like one play-in game, you're equaling you're adding games for some teams, but you already added games for Texas and Georgia, right, as number 1 and number 2. And so you're just kind of leveling that playing field where everybody's kind of playing. I don't know. I don't hate it as much as, now that I'm talking through it, I think it kind of levels things out. Again, you can qualify by just winning, right? Like that's all you got to do is win your games and you get in. And so I don't know if we would have had this year, if you'd have had 3 versus 6, so that would have been Tennessee versus Ole Miss, right? Tennessee versus South Carolina and Alabama, Ole Miss, and the winner of those 2 games get in.
Yeah.
Like that's not terrible. Like that'd be, we'd certainly watch that. And again, we've talked about like more football, better football. I don't know, but
expanding playoffs without calling it expanding the playoffs.
Essentially, you're having the conferences have a play-in game. All right, how about this? I like this. I have never done this on here or anywhere else, but defending the ACC is certainly not my forte. Now they have less teams, so this is kind of a toned down version of this. But they floated the idea. They floated 2 ideas, much like the SEC. I like the first one. I hate the second one. They floated the idea of the number 1 seed in the ACC just getting an automatic bid to the playoffs. Like they don't even play. They're named the conference champion and they're in. And then 2 and 3 play for the ACC's second bid. Obviously, what's been floated is that the SEC and the Big Ten would get 4, the Big 12 and the ACC would get 2. So the ACC has less teams that need to play to figure this out. But I don't necessarily hate that. Your number 1 seed gets an automatic bid. They're in no matter what. They're crowned the champion of the conference. And then 2 and 3 play for a playoff spot. What that would look like this year is that if we had 14 teams, SMU would have made it, and then Clemson, Miami would have played for a spot in the playoff. Like that that wouldn't be a conference championship game, though it happens on conference championship weekend. It would just be a play-in game, kind of what the SEC has with 4 and 5 and 3 and 6. I don't think that's a terrible idea. It's very similar to the SEC and the Big Ten's first model. They just have less teams playing, and the number 1 seed is rewarded by not having to play an extra game. I don't think that's terrible. Their other option is kind of a 2-weekend system, 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and then the next week, the winners of those 2 games would play. I do hate that one. I think that's stupid. I don't really see the need to add extra games. I very much like the first one more. But I do kind of like the idea of rewarding the team that wins the regular season. I like rewarding them. Like we haven't always had conference championship games, right? Like this is, relatively new in the lifespan of college football that's, 120 years old now. I kind of like the idea of rewarding the team that won the conference in the season, giving them a week off, giving them a bye week, because it is always kind of funny to me that the teams that finish first and second in a conference have to play an extra game. Obviously they want to play that extra game. They want to win the SEC, but in a sport where we've now added 4 more games to the end of it, playing that extra game is certainly like, I don't want to call it a detriment, but it's tough. I mean, it puts more on you, right? If you got to play your 12-game season,
it's more,
it's more wear and tear. So I kind of like the idea of giving that 1 seed an advantage. Like, hey, you won the regular season. You don't have to play in this, right? Like you are our champion. We're not going to make you play extra games. You get a little bit of an advantage for that. And so again, I hate to give the ACC any credit at all, but I don't hate that idea. I think it's kind of a good one.
I don't love it. I don't necessarily hate it. My concern would be the fact that we don't really have, like we've talked about a million times, equitable scheduling within our conference. And so, I think this year you look at Georgia and Texas, and I can totally see why you would justify just crowning Georgia the national champion because Texas and Georgia played in the regular season, right? For the SEC championship, yes, but they played in the regular season, right? So that was decided on the field once, and then they played again, and it was decided same outcome on the field a second time. But it concerns me, like, when we did our SEC preview show last year and we talked about Missouri, and we were like, well, they could sleepwalk to 10-2 with that schedule. They should. And then we could look at, let's say a Florida team, and Florida was down last year, so they weren't going to be playing in the SEC championship game, but this is just an example. And we could see like, oh shoot, well, they got to play Georgia. They got to play Texas. They got to play Tennessee. And so if it's what if your person with the best record just had the easiest schedule, and you took away the option of it to be decided on the field in a conference championship? You just went ahead and crowned them because and they had the easier path. And that would be my concern. It wouldn't happen every year, right? But it is a possibility in any given year.
Yeah, the conferences have to do a better job
They
of
do.
scheduling. And, you know, I almost think they're in an impossible spot because what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect rivalries.
Which
And
is also important and
you
something we have
can't,
to hear about.
I don't know that you can protect rivalries and make schedules
Scheduling.
1 to 12 or 1 to 16 that even. Like there's always going to be somebody that has a little bit of an easier road, right? Or a lot easier road because Florida, until they do away with this, like you think about Florida, you mentioned Florida, for example, like they're always going to play Georgia, they're always going to play Tennessee, and they're always going to play LSU. Well, in today's college football, that's 3 really tough games that most teams are not going to have to play those kind of games. And then you know what? They're always going to probably play one of Texas and Oklahoma, right? And then you're going to get Bama factored in there some years as well, right? And so there are going to be years where Florida's schedule, just because of who their natural rivals are, is going to be tougher. But then you look at a team without natural rivals, right? Like a Missouri, right? And they don't have a Georgia on their schedule every single year, and they don't have a Bama on their schedule every single year. And I mean, I think about LSU with the rivalries too, right? Like or Auburn or Tennessee who have to play Alabama and Georgia every single year. Like you think about Florida, but Auburn's kind of in the same boat. And so, what are you going to do first? Are you going to I just don't know that you could have both. I don't think you can have all these protected rivalries and have equal scheduling. And so one of those two has to be sacrificed. And it's like, I mean, as a Florida fan, do you want to not play Tennessee every year or do you want to have equal scheduling? Right. Like that's a very real question.
And the thing that I think will be asked the most is what is the better for revenue? Because that's what actually is king in this. They're not asking the fans, but I would think the rivalry would be
Rivalries,
more
correct.
beneficial financially, which is how we have this lopsided scheduling in the way that it is anyway. But I think there are some things we could do better, and if, let's say, you're trying to protect LSU, Georgia, and Tennessee for Florida, because you're only planning 2 years out, maybe you should be throwing Vanderbilt and Missouri and Kentucky on there. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like more of maybe it shouldn't have been a Texas and I don't know. I think you could be a little bit more deliberate and close the gap a little bit. I think you're right. And write it down. I said it. I think you're right that you're never going to have it be perfectly balanced. And I do think protecting rivalries at the end of the day is more important, but I think we could do a little bit better job. And not planning schedules so far out in the future should allow that change to happen. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I also think that obviously adding Texas and Oklahoma threw a huge wrench into things. And again, realignment is something that is huge in the sport right now. And as a Florida State fan, certainly want to get out of the ACC. But I mean, just in general, I don't like realignment. Like I don't like Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC. I don't like Oregon and Washington and USC in the Big Ten. Like all that's kind of stupid to me. So there's no going back. It's not like things are going to change or fix.
Right.
But I don't like any of that. That's all stupid to me. It's a stupid thing. But like Florida State and North Carolina State have a great rivalry. Like every time that game happens, like it is. Florida State fans hate going there, and people don't even think that's not like one of the big national rivalries. That's not FSU Miami or FSU Clemson or anything like that. But that's going away eventually. Like that game is not going to happen, and so yeah, stuff like that sucks. Like, and so yeah, I don't know. But them adding Texas and Oklahoma threw a wrench into things. But I mean, yeah, you mentioned like we mentioned the Floridas and the Auburns and things like that. And look at the difference in Texas's schedule coming into the SEC. Like we give Oklahoma such a hard time. Oklahoma plays like 7 teams in the top 25 this year. They play the most in the country. Based on the early 25 is not out, but just based on the Vegas odds to win a championship. Sure. And Texas plays like 2. And so you look at the schedules that Texas and Oklahoma were given coming in, and Oklahoma fans got to be like, dude, what? Like, they weren't a good team, but still, like if they'd have played Texas' schedule, they certainly would have had more wins. And if Texas would have played Oklahoma's, I would imagine Texas would have had a loss or 2 more. So, even just looking at those 2 teams coming in, it wasn't very even. But again, how do people get paid a lot more money to figure out schedules than us. So We talked about this on the phone the other day, and this is a little bit crazy, but I do want to play a clip. It's a little bit of a long clip, so if you're watching this, you can fast forward about 3 minutes if you've already seen this take. But I probably butchered this on the phone to you the other day. We are going to watch a clip together and then talk about it. So here's what Josh Pate says you should do on these conference championship races.
Go in this direction. I actually prefer the automatic qualifiers, but that's not the sick part. The detractors listen to that, and they say things like, but what about how imbalanced the schedules are? And I hear you, and I've got an answer for that. And the detractors say, I kind of like the chaos and the objectivity of having, a committee deciding things. I may disagree with you, but I'm willing to entertain that. I've got an idea for that. And a detractor may also say, hey, if we go the automatic qualifier route, and we're just focused on the league standings, if that's really what's going to determine who gets your 4 spots, who cares about out-of-conference games? Yeah, you can tell me that Ole Miss is playing Michigan, but if they know that it's all going to come down to their league standings, well, who cares who wins that game? Isn't it a glorified exhibition game? It is if you go by league standings in a classical sense. Who's to say that the top 6 in the SEC is just the top 6 according to the conference standings? Who's to say I don't have my own subcommittee within conferences that determine that 1 through 6? Now that's an insane concept, but it's really not. It's just never been done before. But then again, we've never had the sport look like this before. The leagues are too big. The leagues right now are such that we could be both playing in the Big Ten, and I play a schedule and you play a schedule, and you end up playing 5 top 20 teams and I play 1. Well, we're not playing 162 games. We're playing 8 or 9 conference games, and there is vast disparity in strength of schedule to the point where the top 6 may not really be the best 6. But what can I do if I'm solely going by league standings? Well, a conference rankings committee takes care of that. And I'll tell you what else they do. A conference rankings committee removes your ability to totally mail in an effort in an out-of-conference game because they are grading you on everything. That conference committee, that SEC or Big Ten conference committee is judging you just like the playoff committee would have. They're just judging you within the confines of your conference. There's room to maneuver, number one, because inevitably, if you're playing 9 conference games or 8 conference games, you're going to have a ton of ties, so you'll need those settled. And I would love some informed judgment on that matter. Number two, if you have such a disparity in strength of schedule to where one team is 1 game worse than the other, but it's blatantly obvious to everyone that, hey, the 9-3 team here, number one, they played a much tougher league schedule than the 10-2 team. Number two, they've got 6 quad 1 wins, and this dude has 2. And number 3, they won against Michigan and Iowa out of conference, and the 10-2 team played garbage out of conference. Well, then I want to be able to rectify that in the room. So what did we just do there? We maintained the value of out-of-conference games, because you better go try and win them, or you're going to get punished for them at the hands of your conference committee. Number 2, I made sure that there's a mechanism that accounts for the radical imbalance in conference scheduling because of how big the conferences are. And number 3, for those of you out there who actually love the subjectivity and you love the chaos and the debate from the committee every week, well, I just enhanced it tenfold because now you got it in every conference. Is it crazy? Of course it's crazy. All of this is crazy.
So he admits that, like, this is crazy, and we know that this is probably not going to happen. Your biggest complaint in talking over the last year has mostly been around Florida's schedule, how Florida has the toughest SEC schedule, the toughest schedule in the conference, which, of course, or in the country. The toughest SEC schedule is almost always going to be the toughest in the country. But you have had that complaint. I know his proposition is crazy. Yeah. I do think he kind of fixes that. And then my biggest complaint over the last 2 or 3 weeks that we've been talking about this is, yeah, we're going to get this Big Ten SEC scheduling agreement, and it's going to be great to see Alabama, Ohio State week 1. Like, who doesn't want that? Until we get to a point where we realize 2 or 3 years in, like, that game didn't matter. Like, that game did not matter at all because all that they're judging them on is their conference record. Alabama, Ohio State could literally go 0-3 out of conference, go 9-0 in conference, in the Big Ten, with maybe an easy schedule, and they're going to be in, right? And so and 9-3 might get them in anyway, right? But they could go 8-1, right, in the conference, and then they're in. So I think that he does address both problems. Now, I don't love the idea of committees. I think the playoff committee is stupid, and I don't think we need it. I agree with you on the BCS stuff, but I don't hate this idea of, hey, a 10-2 Missouri this year versus a 9-3 Florida. I would rather an SEC committee say, nah, man, Florida at 9-3 deserves to be in. So I think his fix, though it's crazy, is not that crazy. Like, I think it would be better than what they're about to do.
So I think it fixes a problem, right? But I think there's just such an easier fix. I think having a formula that everybody agrees to that takes into account all of that stuff fixes the problem much easier than a committee does. I also think that each conference's job is only to determine their conference champion. I don't think that the conference should play a role in determining who else goes to the playoff from their conference. I like the fact that that is an unbiased system, right? In theory. I don't love that it's a committee. I have said time and time again, I think a formula.
Can I back you up on that 1 second? I don't think he's proposing that it would be to determine who wins the conference. I don't want to put words in his mouth.
He's using it to determine who goes to the playoffs.
Who goes to the playoff, right? Like if Missouri in our situation went 8, if they make it 9 games, 8-1 in conference and 0-3 out of conference, they would still win the SEC or be in the top 2 of the SEC.
I just don't think that the conferences need to have a role in who's determining who's going to the playoffs. I feel like the conference should have a role in determining who plays in their championship. And we do, because we come up with a set of rules. Okay, here's the schedule. Here's what the tiebreakers are. Here is, and I think that's their job. I don't think it's the conference's job to pick who represents it in the playoffs. I think that kind of takes away a little bit of the mystique of it when that's how it's determined versus, coming from this non-biased committee. But I understand.
Aren't they already determining that just by league standings? Like the conference sets out the league.
I don't think for at large they're looking at, when they're picking an at large bid, I don't think they're necessarily looking to see did the SEC determine this school finished third?
No. I mean, isn't the conference already determining who goes to the playoffs? They're just basing it on the conference standings.
I don't know. They're determining it kind of in how they set up the schedule, right? So you can make an easier or a tougher path to teams based on how you've set up the schedule. But the SEC is not setting up the non-conference. The schools are setting up the non-conference. And whether the SEC use the non-conference as challenging as maybe somebody outside of the conference would, I don't know that, I think that there can be just some disparity there. But I don't think it's the conference's roles. I think it's fixing a problem that maybe doesn't exist in that aspect. I think the easiest thing to do to make sure that the regular season counts, that we care about out of conference games, that that all of those things matter, is just simply by a formula that calculates it all out for us. I think the biggest problem that we have is that we've got 12 people sitting in a room with a set of standards that we don't know what they are, that could in theory be different from one week to the next, to determine who is going. And then we've compounded the problem when we say the top 4 conference champions, no matter what, get the top 4 seats. And I think that those two things have what caused all the rest of the problems. And those are actually simpler fixes than creating an entire subcommittee for every single conference to determine.
Yeah. So I agree with you. The best way possible would be for us to just bring back the computers and just bring back the BCS for 1 through 14. I have no problem with that. And I'm even okay giving auto bids, not auto seeds, but auto bids.
Sure, to
the 5, to the conference champions in the group.
I've got seeding.
Yeah, I have no problem. The problem is, so your fix is better than Pate's. I'll agree with that. And it does fix all the same problems: strength of schedule, out of conference, all those things. I just don't think, I think that they're not going to do that, right? And they're not going to do Pate's thing either. But my worry is that what they're actually going to do, and what it sounds like they're going to do based on these in our last segment, what we talked about, the play-in games and things like that. My worry is that for at least 2 or 3 years, and hopefully it'll go poorly and they'll fix it, I need like a 7-5 SEC team to get in that goes like undefeated or like undefeated in conference, like out of conference do terrible, just so that we can say like, okay, well this was stupid. Like let's fix this. Or like a Clemson to lose to South Carolina, lose their opener to LSU, lose one more game, and then win the ACC. And we say, all right, out of conference just means nothing at this point. Like, let's fix it. But I think both your fix and Pate's fix is better than what's about to happen.
Yeah.
And what's about to happen is what he just mentioned, Michigan versus Ole Miss, and it's a preseason game. It is a completely, like, what's about to happen is worse than Pate's idea. It's worse than your idea. It's worse than anything I can come up with.
Powers that be don't see it the same way.
And maybe they are thinking about it and they're just working backwards. But again, if we're doing play-in games just based on conference standings, to me, that's terrible. Like, that is so stupid because, again, it's going to reward a Missouri who plays nobody out of conference, and it's going to penalize a Florida who plays Florida State and Notre Dame in a couple of years and all these other teams out of conference that you're like, wait, what? Or a Florida who plays all these natural rivals in Missouri who doesn't have anybody. And so, I don't like what's probably coming. And so I think that's why Pate and me and you and everybody's grasping at straws, because we don't want to see the first month of the regular season be meaningless.
Right.
Like, you don't think Lane Kiffin's going to not he cheats when it comes to having guys go down for injuries. Like, you don't think he's not going to you think he's going to take those games seriously in September? You know, like, come on. If a guy is a little bit banged up in your last out of conference game, you're going to play him if that game doesn't really matter. So I'm not looking forward to that at all.
It's more and more like every other sport, which has been the novelty of college football is that it is so different. It's that we don't have that first month like basketball or college baseball where we're like, we're just kind of figuring things out at this point. I've explained college gymnastics, which I absolutely love, but like how the routines are going to get changed and lineups are going to get worked on all year, because basically as long as you hang around enough to qualify for your conference title meet, which is like 8 teams, so pretty decently easy to qualify for, you have a shot at the national championship. Like, these sports are just set up differently than college football. And I hate anything that moves us closer to, I guess, the norm.
Yeah. Everything is just getting closer to the NFL model. Although this isn't, right? It is putting the emphasis on winning your conference or qualifying, being in the top half of your conference. But when the Bucs play the Bills, it means just as much as when the Bucs play an in-conference, because yes, winning your division does get you that automatic berth, like college football is doing, but they still judge you based on your overall record, right? Yeah. And so I don't know. We're going to get all these great matchups of Michigan versus LSU, and then we're going to say in 2 years, yeah, but that game doesn't mean anything. It means something because we haven't seen football in 9 months. I get all that, but it ain't going to mean we will get to a point where we're like, all right, they got to fix this. And it's the biggest problem with expansion that I can find.
Yeah. I agree. All right, guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us today. This was fun. Whether you watched it live Monday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning or you're watching this later, we appreciate your support. We would love it if you would go to A Peek Inside SEC Football and just click that little like button. It's the best way to show TJ and I some support on this channel. We appreciate you guys being here, and we'll do it again real soon.